What's going on? Boys, arm yourselves, life stuff. So, I've been taking an uncharacteristic mental sabbatical, doing like Lance, getting the face paint on and fading into the trees, trying to make sense of the collapse before getting stuck in another decision. And we talk sometimes about art and artists, sometimes without intending to, nailing something true and obscure. And you hear these sorts of suspicions regularly around Lovecraft's writings, but one of the most dead on is, I think, also one of the most basic. Human minds are not built to comprehend truth, much less endure truth. The more a human is exposed to the truth of things, the more they lose it. And I think that is what happened with my little episode. It was not just overexposure to negativity, it was instead overexposure to unfiltered reality. And reality is very ugly. Every single little component of the reality engine is a vector for evil on a level you can't begin to understand. And it's like fascination in Cultist Simulator. The more you know, the more you are controlled by your knowing. You come to realize there is no escape, there is no reprieve, there isn't something to hope for because there is nothing good. And you go from looking at something mundane and seeing nothing because it's mundane to seeing all the evil in this thing to then not only seeing all the evil in this thing but also seeing all the evil in the world this thing and its evil are attached to. And you come to understand you can't fight it, so maybe you try to join it, or to adopt its methods, whatever you want to call it. We think a lot about Willard and Kurtz. Why did Kurtz lose his mind and Willard didn't? Well, I think it's how they deal with horror. Because Willard and Kurtz, as similar as they are not the same. And we are appropriately and thematically going to be referring to unfiltered reality as horror. So, how do Kurtz and Willard deal with horror? Well, the corporation pretends like it doesn't exist. Or rather, they acknowledge it but don't deal with it. Or get their hands dirty with it, I mean. They do deal with it in the sense whenever any of these horror people pop up, they're executed. Willard, however, does get his hands dirty with it, but, like the corporation, he does not embrace it. Willard's alcoholism, his episode in the beginning of Apocalypse Now is heavy, but once you learn about Martin Sheen's alcoholism and the context surrounding that scene, it's a lot heavier. Horror torments Willard, and he is tormented by it. He fights it, but he doesn't embrace it. And I think that's why Willard doesn't crack. Because as within horror as Willard is, as horrific as he really doesn't try ever to make a friend of horror. Willard is the observer, the censor, or again appropriately, maybe intentionally, the witness of horror, just as Willard is the witness to Kurtz's final days. Willard witnesses, but he does not embrace. Kurtz dealt with the horror by trying to make a friend of it. And cosmic horror fits in Apocalypse Now, or as a theme of Apocalypse Now, even though it's not cosmic horror, very well, I think. Your nature and the reality you inhabit are cosmic horrors. Too much exposure to what you really are and what this really is breaks you. Kurtz and Willard both understand horror. They understand the horror of human nature and reality. Willard might not stand against it, he might just witness it, but he does not entwine himself deeper with horror. Kurtz, the dark sorcerer, recognizes that horror, human nature, unfiltered reality, is the way things are. We are just pretending that this isn't the way things are. And if we stop pretending and embrace what we are and what reality is, then we can get a lot more done, a lot better, a lot faster. And the moment Kurtz removes those reality filters, not just removing them to bear witness as Willard does, but further to use reality, to use horror, to make friends of them. Like magic, Kurtz starts winning hard. Because reality is reality, horror is horror, and horror is powerful. Because it's real. But I think Kurtz cracks because horror is disintegrating. If we're able to call our nature and reality evil, or the horror, then from our position, even if it is reality, it is still bad, hurty feels for us. Meaning, you can open yourself to reality, to your nature, to the horror, and benefit from it in some ways. It will still grate you down like cheese. I mean, you will be grated down like cheese. You'll grate yourself down like cheese, and you'll deserve it, because that's what reality is. That's the horror. That's the truth that is always true and always operating, but the more you understand not just what it is, but how constant and permanent and inevitable it is, it starts breaking your mind a bit. Regardless, befriending or harnessing it, the horror, isn't an answer because there is no answer. You could say Kurtz cracked. I would say Kurtz cracked early. His doctrine allowed horror to touch his soul directly, and he broke. Willard hasn't broken because although he swims in horror, he hasn't opened his soul to it yet. And I say Kurtz breaks early because if Willard were to open his soul to horror, he would turn out exactly the same way. That's why Kurtz likes him. Two very similar men whose endgame philosophies diverged. One could have been the other. Versus someone like Lance, who is also an endgame deity, except on a totally different side of things. Lance has gotten up close to the horror in a totally different way. But why are we in the Apocalypse Now maelstrom? Once we get in, it's really hard to get out. Well, it's mainly to illustrate the codification of a couple things. Lovecraft is real, and the creeping dread is the truth of your nature and your station. Everything is bad, and there is nothing you can do. You are so cosmically doomed. If you began to understand a percentage of it, you would lose your mind. This first point means real truth is never good. It's like a gravity well. It draws you in, and the closer to the center you get, to the singularity, the more you get spaghettified, atomized. Things really are that bad and worse, but you can't truly make friends of them. You might develop certain powers, but you'll get ripped apart anyway, the same way everyone else and everything else will. you'll just do it sooner and hurt the entire time. And the second thing is looking at truth like it is radiation. Anything that exposes you to the horrors of reality and your nature, especially in a way you can't argue, develops your rads. This is Fallout now. And I think it moves in steps. Watching that video of, I think it was in China, this was when I was younger, people not helping a wounded child in the street. So many people walking by. That's a little bit of radiation, because you can deny it. I've seen people say that video is fake, and I never understood why they would say something like that, but probably because it's horrifying. The idea that people would walk by a wounded child because they don't want to have to deal with it is horrifying. But even if you're just looking at that video and you do accept that the video is real, you can say there are 7 billion people on the planet. Just so, unfortunately, a bunch of shitty ones walked by the kid. But then you look at statistics. This isn't a rare thing, this is a systemic aspect of human nature. The bystander effect. And that's another level of radiation. But then you save yourself or try to save yourself by saying, well, you would never do that. And then you, like a punch in the stomach, encounter a moment you do exactly that. These are pipelines into understanding reality, increasing levels of awareness and exposure to reality. You accumulate these awful truths. Not only can you not deny any longer, but also can't stop seeing everywhere now that you are aware of them. And then that evil and that pressure multiplies when you see always, everywhere, people denying that these truths are even a possibility, much less true if they actually happened. It's maddening. And that leads us into the third thing, which is more of a question. The question. What are you supposed to do? Because truth-seeking just builds up radiation in your body until you snap. You don't want to snap mentally from reality overexposure. But you also can't bury your head in the sand, because the entire reason your head is out of the sand is something kept jostling you and you wanted to find out what it is. You can't just rebury your head, at least not easily. But is finding a more secure way to bury your head the answer? That seems like what most people do. Whatever it is they turn to, if that's religion, if that's philosophy, if that's science or some archetype, they find their limited, false, comforting answer, whatever it is, and then parade it around and debate it like they've solved it or they're making progress, and they think they have. The confusion here is, as meat grinder slaughterhouse as reality is, proud delusion. Ooh, God, that stinks. It's stinky. I hate it. I despise it. I think what makes it stink so much is these people are the kings and queens of the sitting ducks. So do you join them, crawl into a delusion as best you can, maybe you find one that does suit you, that you can trick yourself with, and be someone who figured it out. Be one of the many people who found the answer. So you can pretend, or so you can feel good, so you can shield yourself from reality, and hopefully when reality takes you, you're so distracted with your marveling at your own genius that you beat reality when reality comes for you, it doesn't hurt? Or do you try to do the Kurtz again? Do you try again to align yourself with unfiltered reality, knowing you are going to snap again? If you're allying with reality to avoid reality, that's not going to help. It's going to crack you sooner, no matter what powers you develop. Or do you go the Willard route? The good church girl. Horror is okay on you, but not in you. But that seems to hurt too, except you hang on to your mind a little bit longer. So Kurtz, lose your mind quickly. Willard, lose your mind later. Delusion people, satisfied people, people who are content, people who are complete, people who have all the answers and will never see it coming until it hits them, at least they won't see it coming until it hits them. They might not lose their minds until they don't have minds to lose. And that might even be admirable, because that level of delusion really does take effort. The reason your head is out of the sand is because whatever was jostling you jostled you bad enough you wanted to look and make it stop. Whereas Johnny Delusion, with the bag on his head, had so much willpower he was able to ignore feeling jostled at all. There's also the Lance route, but that's not an escape either. Or maybe it is. Lance, his body remains, but his soul has evaporated. If that process wasn't painful, then Lance, now an animal, now faded into the trees, no longer has a soul horror can inflict anything on. But of course, that is basically just cracking. But that might be the answer. Nirvana Now, the movement Apocalypse Now mocks with its name, might be the answer. However, with drugs, unlike Lance, your ego death, your ego's not actually going to die, it's going to come back, it's going to resurrect really quickly, almost like it didn't die. And then you'll be firmly entrenched in a different delusion, which is less of an answer than Lance's escape is, but at least it's a delusion, at least it's a shield. Overall, I don't know the path forward. I still want to know, even though I know knowing does not lead anywhere good insofar as you can actually know anything. All it's going to do is hurt you and end you early. I still want to know. Maybe it's like a Venus flytrap. Maybe all unfiltered truth knowledge is itself a cognitohazard. Just asking why is enough to begin building your horror density. But delusions, when and where they can be had, feel a lot better. And if reality is going to get us one way or another, why not try to feel happy before it gets you? If you're able to fool yourself into being happy at this point, that's a miracle in and of itself. That's something to be celebrated. Why not fool yourself into believing you have the answer if you can? Why try to bear the pain of reality straight if there's no nobility in it? Because remember, there's no nobility in it. All there is hurt. All there is horror. Why wouldn't you try to fool yourself into enjoying the time you have? Because fuck him, that's why? You're still getting beaten with a monkey wrench. There's no nobility in abuse or in suffering. Though maybe you could extract some joy from this by fooling yourself so. That would be a good start. I don't know. All I know is what we've learned. Truth is disintegration. Truth irradiates you. it attacks you from more vectors the more you learn about it. Everything will be disintegrated, and you can't avoid disintegration by making friends with it. You'll just get disintegrated earlier, and in a more painful way. The only way to fight reality is not by fighting reality, because you can't fight reality. The best you can do is engage in 7D escapism, mental gymnastics supreme, in an attempt to forget that you know everything is disintegrating. It feels kinda like we got the truth ending. Face truth, walk into it, be summarily ripped apart. New Game Plus, are we going down the delusion route, except with additional challenge modifiers, making getting the delusion ending, maybe that's the good ending, a bit harder. Because choosing not to learn something is one level of difficulty. Choosing to forget something or try to forget something once you've learned it is another level of difficulty. Because remember, truth, reality, horror isn't just something you are exposed to. It's something, if you intend to understand it, you need to step into. Meaning you need to step right the fuck back out. I'm rambling because I don't know. It's hard to accept, although kind of fun, to understand we live in a Lovecraft world. We have our cosmic horrors, they're real. Your nature and your circumstances, they're real. They will make you lose your mind if you think about them too hard, and especially if you internalize them. How do you teach yourself to enjoy holographic meat, to taste it, and to feel full eating it, knowing that Karen Meatloaf is a farce? I don't know, but cosmic horrors are real, and you really can drive yourself mad trying to understand them. It's a weird revelation. This is reality. Lil Bro was alive to witness the creeping dread. This is all shocking because it's coming together as we're speaking. Could it be argued we have reached a new peak by this understanding that these great, corrupting, evil, unthinkably evil old ones are real, and we live in their presence every day? It just took until this point for us to see them and conceptualize of them as such. For the first time, actually, you see a god in, if not totality, then some kind of fractionality or some shit. It's weird. It's the weirdest majesty. To feel your existential dread is to feel the touch of a god that hates you. You can feel it directly, and then you can see it. So maybe this is a new level, but I would also like to stop having levels. I'm to the point I would like not just not to know, but also not to know that I don't know. I don't like the way reality radiation feels. I'm trying to feel out all these options. We'll try to figure these things out. Don't lose your mind. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.